Welcome to the Live Intentional podcast. Here we will explore stories, ideas, and questions from our life with the hope to ignite you to live according to your values and beliefs.
On this podcast, we will share our visions from our past, present, and future.
Our hope is by us sharing our story, we can inspire you to live more intentional and make you think about new ways to get creative in your relationships.
We hope you will follow us on this journey. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Intentional Living Podcast. Today we're going to talk about how to overcome the pressures of society.
Yeah, pressures from society have been noticeably increasing, due to social media and being able to see things instantly in other people's lives. But before social media, you had outside pressures from those you would talk to or see or the people around you. But now you can constantly see what everyone around the world is doing and all in one place. But we have to remember that social media does not always portray life as it is. Remember, you are only seeing what people want you to see.
Yeah, so during the episode, we're going to kind of talk about, we've focused on three main subjects for us. And then there's tons of others though, of course, but there's three that we're going to focus on, which is relationships, careers, and then comparison to others and their timelines, which can also be kind of throughout the others as well.
Yeah, and we also have a little section at the end that we'll talk about that will kind of cover just how to deal with the pressures of society on your own. But first we'll start out with relationship. We might think that it's imperative to date or to be in a relationship because of our friend groups or social medias, like we said, but it's important to remember that everyone is on their own timeline and then it's not a race.
Yeah, especially as times have changed. I feel for our grandparents and great-grandparents, it was expected that you'd be married by the age of 25,
right.
And people just expected you to start having children as soon as you're married. But I feel now, especially with men and female both becoming more focused on their careers. Back then, a lot of female didn't even go to college.
Yeah.
So I think with that changing also, there's not necessarily maybe you do get some of those pressures still, or just feel I want to be married by this age, but everyone's on their own timeline and kind of have to do things at your own pace.
Yeah, and it's important to just focus on yourself at first and kind of organize your life to where you want it to be before stepping into a relationship and wanting to care for someone else. Because if you can't care for yourself, how is it possible to give that love to somebody else, And if you are in a relationship or you're married, just remember there is no script or guidelines to what your relationship should look like. It's not that it needs to look like this person, because like we said, we can see it all the time on social media. Everybody looks like they're living this glamorous life. But, that's just a snippet of what people want you to see. And there's no timeline that you have to follow to be, like you said, have kids right away or get married right away, Yeah,
I think that's important to remember, because now with social media being so, influential compared to, our grandparents, great-grandparents, that wasn't around. So you're seeing, and, travel wasn't as prevalent. So you're seeing mostly the people, in your communities. Now you're seeing, everyone from various areas. And if, typically people usually kind of follow people sort of around the same age as them. So I feel if you're seeing that and you're oh wow, this person has this, they're the same age as me, I am not doing the same things they are.
Right.
But it's not like that.
Yeah.
Everyone has their own timeline, and you're also, like you said, just seeing a little portion of what people usually want you to see.
Right. Yeah, and we said in the beginning of this podcast, well, not this episode, but when we first started, we started dating in high school. Obviously, we weren't going to get married in high school, but we waited 13 years, 10 years to get married because of high school. And then after high school, you wanted to pursue nursing and college. I didn't really know what I wanted to do, so I went to college with you and then kind of figured out my life. And we kind of had this timeline, let's get through college, figure out where we want to go with our life before we get married, and then move to that next step.
Yeah. So we've wrote down some ways that you can challenge the pressures of society while being in a relationship, if you currently are in one. Well, the first one we wrote was to sit down and talk to your significant other about what you want your relationship to look like, and to kind of create your own, I guess, guidelines. Yeah,
guidelines to kind of uphold. Like we said, we knew that in high school we weren't going to get married. We wanted to move on to college. So that was kind of our guideline on where we wanted to uphold and get through college and then decide from there. I think it was my senior year when I asked you, when we got engaged. Yeah, my senior year, because No,
your junior year.
My junior year, yeah, because we got married then in my senior year, yeah.
Yeah.
So, kind of create those guidelines together and kind of have a plan of action to when you want to take those next steps, just so that way you're both on the same page.
Yeah, I think that's good. And then I also think like be a little bit flexible, because even though we have plans, things don't always like work out.
Right, something
quite
comes
as
up
you
or something,
expect.
yeah, falls off the rails, and you have to adjust that. And then at that point, what you should do is sit down and reevaluate
Yes.
your guidelines and kind of, shape it to where that railway is leading now.
Yeah, exactly. Another one we did was to create boundaries, to combat like questions that you might experience in your personal relationship. A lot of it's out of like good intention and good hearted, but sometimes it can be really taxing.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of people, when you're in a relationship, the common questions are kind of always asking about that, like,
When are you getting
next step,
married?
like, oh, you think you're gonna get engaged soon? Is this the one?
Yeah.
Oh, now that you're engaged, when are you getting married? You guys gonna have kids right away?
Right.
And then like once you're married, everyone's like waiting for children, but that's not everyone's timeline.
No, and
So
I
I
think
think-
it's out of excitement too of your
Yeah.
family and friends. Like they see that it's coming, and they're just like, but it's it's overwhelming, like you said, and you feel pressured to have to speed up your guidelines that we talked about in the first thing, where that you sit down and talk about, where you feel like you need to just skip steps and just do it now,
Yeah.
which it's not true.
No, so I think it's good to be comfortable within yourself and your relationship first, and not to just kind of like do these things because maybe like the questions are being asked a lot and you feel pressure to like move on to the
Right.
next step in life. Just take it at your own pace.
Yeah, and you remember that you guys sat down and talked about this, though. This is something that you two agree on, and there's nobody else in the relationship besides the two of you.
Yeah, exactly.
So the next one would be to question the norms and communicate with each other. Is there any reason to change something that isn't or is working out? So if you sit down and talk to one another and say, hey, this is working, why should we change this? Like that's the next step from getting those questions. Why change up our guidelines and our morals to fit the common, questions and the common norms that always come with that?
Yeah. I feel like I like how you said that, because like if it's something that's working for you just because you're getting a lot of outside pressure or seeing what everyone else is doing, like why change it just to fit into that?
Right.
Like if you are really happy in the place that you're in and this is working out really well, like there's no need to do that.
Yeah, something that we kind of said last night when we were jotting down these notes for this episode was think of it kind of as a script. If your script is working, a good producer or director isn't going to change that script,
Yeah.
Like why? Because somebody else says, hey, you should put this in the script. But if the director loves that part, why would he take that out when it's his script,
Yeah.
So this is your guy's script. So stick with your script, talk your script out, and change if you have to, or keep it how it is.
Yeah, it's perfect. It's like writing the own story of your life.
Right,
And
your own love
everyone's
story.
everyone's looks different. Another way to challenge pressures would be to not compare your relationship to another person's relationship. Everyone looks so different, and I feel like it's hard sometimes, especially like around holidays. I feel like with social media, you see what everyone else is doing, like, oh, this
Right.
person got this gift, or they're doing this, or like, oh wow, I wish we were doing that for Valentine's Day. But you have to be really careful not to compare. I talk about it a little bit later, but I really feel like comparison is like the biggest thief of joy, because you can be so happy at where you are and like love what you did for a special occasion, and then as soon as you start comparing it to others, of course someone else is always going to do something more extravagant, something that costs more money, something that like maybe you don't even have the financial means,
Or maybe you
it's
didn't
not
even
around your
think of,
location. Yeah, but you were so happy in the beginning with what you did, and then you compare it to what someone else did, and it just steals all that joy.
Yeah, I love that. Totally. So then we have some ways to challenge the norms of society if you are not in a relationship. So self-reflect is big. Before jumping into a relationship, understand what you want out of a relationship and what you want that relationship to look like and what you are looking for. Because like we said earlier, if you don't know what you want and you're not satisfied with yourself, how can you portray that onto somebody else,
Yeah. And then also, if you're not even necessarily looking for a relationship, it's okay to also not be in one. If you're really
Right.
happy and content being single and you love the spot you're at in your life right now.
Yeah, maybe it's just not time.
Yeah. Also remember that everyone is on their own path. Maybe you're in school, or you're focusing on your career. Maybe you're waiting for that like next promotion or something. So it's not necessary to always be in a relationship. Maybe there's other things that you're focused on right now, which kind of goes with what you said.
Yeah,
With
and-
just being like, it can be about you right now. Do the things that you want to
Wanna
do
do, right.
before. Yeah.
Right, and it can also go back to what I just said about the script. Like, you should have a script for you yourself should have your own script of life too, and that can go for if you're in a relationship or if you're not in a relationship. in a relationship, you should have a script for yourself and then a script together. If you're not in a relationship, script your life out and kind of create those guidelines on where you want to be at that moment.
Something else, and I feel like this can be like a little touchy of a topic, but maybe getting back to dating with the purpose of marrying and not just dating to kind of like date around and see who's out there.
Yeah.
I feel like the social norm right now is kind of to just like casually date, especially with like different like dating apps and just different things. I feel like a lot of people just kind of like get out there and meet people, which is good to meet people,
right.
But
with the right intentions, that's good. But dating for marriage can really narrow down what you're looking for out of a relationship, and it can also help you make better decisions when searching for a relationship. So that way, that relationship is more meaningful to you than just going out and dating for a week and realizing, oh, I don't like this. Like if you guys aren't clicking, then there's going to be tension. So kind of getting back to the dating with the purpose for marriage, we understand that's a touchy topic, but I think that a lot of people our age and younger have lost that sense and just want to go out and date as many people as they can because maybe own benefit.
Yeah, I feel like if you're dating with the idea of marriage in mind, it typically narrows out a lot of people, I feel like. Don't you think? Because it's like you're like now looking for the person who you would want to spend the remainder of your life with. So I feel like it like kind of gets out like a lot of the fluff and can take away some of like the anxieties of just going out on like dates all the time.
Yeah, exactly. Next one we have here is how to deal with the pressures in a career. In current times, careers are a very important part of both male and female lives. Many individuals have careers and are very career driven, with attending higher education as well as re-enrolling to complete a graduate degree. It can be easy to compare yourself to what others are doing.
Yeah, I think being really like career driven and focused is good, but then there's also there's like a lot of competition within it too, and then just comparison within it, because some people are constantly looking for that next step within their career, which is awesome, but it's not for everyone. But when you're constantly getting that pressure from others, you're like, oh, should I be like doing the next thing? Should I be re-enrolling in school? Should I be like looking to get that next bonus, looking to become a manager, like constantly taking that ladder up? And that's really not for everyone. Some people just want to enjoy the career they're in, feel like they're doing a really good job, and get to kind of like separate that from their home life. Not everyone wants to constantly be doing like the next step, and I think that's okay. It's also okay if you want to take the next step. Yep.
And I've been through a couple like jobs in my life so far that also where you might feel stuck, and like you feel like those norms of society saying you need to work, you need to do this, and you need to stay in a job. But like when you're being told, oh, there's room for growth here, and years go by and you're not growing there, it's okay to leave that job and find something else too. It can also go the opposite way where you don't feel safe at work, or you don't feel like you're growing at work and you need something more, and look for something else, and that's okay. Don't get complacent with where you are.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think it's also like never too late to start a new career. Say it's something that you thought you were going to love and you're working within it and you're like, oh, this just like isn't clicking. I feel like it's also okay to even change career paths.
Yeah, and that kind of goes along with what I just said. Right, exactly.
Which then kind of like shifts your timeline, because if you're restarting on a new career path, you may have to take some back steps.
Right.
Perhaps it requires some schooling, get through
that
rewriting
again. That script that we talked about,
But it's just okay to do it that way, It's what you have to work within the rest of your life. So I feel like pick the career path that feels best for you.
And don't be afraid to change it and stuff. And then within certain fields of work, one can experience a lot of outside pressures to further one's education or constantly move up in the rankings. And at their own place of work, it is important just to remember not to feel that you have to do more because of the pressures of others, but to make your own decisions based on what you feel is right for you and what you want to gain out of your career path. That's really huge. I feel like that kind of sums up that whole section in a way, like don't, just because others at work are doing more and want more out of their job, if you're, not to go back to complacency, but if you're complacent doing the work that you're doing and you still enjoy the job, stay there and do what you're doing. There's no reason to take that further step with no incentive, no motivation to do so.
Yeah, and then I think also the opposite. Say you are comfortable at where you're working, but not necessarily like happy with the place that you're working anymore, just because you're comfortable there now and you kind of like know how the system is and it's familiar. that's also, I feel like, not a good enough reason to stay at that job.
Right.
It's also okay just because you're comfortable there. It's okay to look elsewhere where you think somewhere that might support you a bit more. Or
Right. Yeah, and it kind of, that all, both of what I said and what you said comes down to that complacency. So realizing that you're complacent first, and then is it a happy complacent or not happy complacent? And then you kind of draw that guideline from there, like, okay, I can stay here and maybe, tank it out, or, this is not for me and I may need to look for something else.
Yeah, and that's going to be scary. Change is
Yeah,
scary.
change is
So
always scary.
I feel like just because the change is going to be scary, don't let yourself stay in a position at where you're not
Exactly.
necessarily happy just because it's familiar and comfortable. Like, take that next step. It's going to be a challenge. It'll be hard, but you'll be better off for it.
Yeah, and yes, exactly.
Then our third topic that we mentioned that we were going to talk about is comparison to others and their timelines, which I feel like we talked about within the other twos, but this just kind of
Sums it all up almost. Yeah, this is probably the biggest impact of society, I feel like, that has on people, the pressures of society have on people, is seeing all that, like we said, on social media, and the comparison to others and their timelines, which can have a negative impact on your timeline.
Yeah. It feels a little bit more like when you're looking at social media and seeing what everyone's posting, it feels a bit more like comparison than it does like celebrating each other's accomplishments. I feel like when you're like with your group of friends and families and you're hearing about what everyone else is doing, it feels a bit more like you're like able to celebrate everyone's accomplishments and you're happy for each other. Whereas when you're just like mindlessly scrolling through social media and seeing people that you don't necessarily even know, that feels a little bit more like, I feel like comparison's a little bit more easy during then.
We're our own worst critics, and we're constantly comparing ourselves to others, which, like we said, can steal your joy and steal your happiness. But comparison is something that is gonna happen. It's inevitable. We compare ourselves every day to every little thing. We just need to learn how to combat that comparison and be grateful for what we have in our life and the life that we're living, because it's ours and it's what we scripted out for ourselves.
Yeah. So I think like when you're kind of like scrolling through, it's really easy to start comparing. You see a lot of people say like buying homes, making big purchases, having career goals that they're meeting, starting to create families. And if you're someone who like scrolls through this a lot and these are things you're seeing, but not maybe like necessarily doing at the current time, I feel like it can be difficult to enjoy the place that you are within your life when you're seeing all of this and you're like, oh wow, like look at what everyone else is doing. I feel like maybe I should be doing these things, and you're not. That's okay. You don't need to be doing those things, even though like maybe it's what a lot of people around you are doing. I feel like it's important to reflect and see and like remember what you're doing at this time and kind of celebrate your own accomplishments. Take it back to like what you're doing. This is your life. You're not living in someone else's shoes.
Exactly.
And bring it back to yourself and be like, no, I am happy with where I am. Like, that's okay. That stuff will come at a later time for me.
Exactly. Yeah. And we're all on our own path. So we can't let somebody else's joy bring us, sadness.
Yeah.
Instead, maybe celebrate that joy and celebrate, like you said, where we're at right now, because finding little things that you're grateful for, which I know that we all have things throughout our day that we're grateful for, can definitely help boost your morale and get you moving when you do feel down about things like that as well.
Yeah, I feel like from my own experience, this is something that I've definitely noticed. I feel like when we got married, I was like 25, and I feel like I had my own plan, like kind of like pathed out, and I was like, okay, like we'll get married, we're gonna get a house right away, and I think that was my biggest thing. And then like when I saw like a ton of people who are like around the same age, which like given some are influencers, so like making money doing off like from that, but I was like, oh man, like it was really set in my head that we were gonna get a house by this age, and I feel like that was hard. But then we like talk together, how we mentioned earlier, and we
drew out a script.
That's like not on our timeline. It will come. Like, don't get upset that it's not happening right at this moment when like you initially planned in your head that you thought it was going to happen. And just celebrate where you are, have joy in that, and just know that at a later time that'll come.
And just remember to follow that script.
I also think if you're someone that like notices yourself doing this a lot, maybe just take some time away from like the social media, because it's just added stress from like your already surrounding group around you. If you notice you're getting it a lot from social media is where your stressors are coming from, just like put it away, take a break, get outside, kind of do like some of that gratitude for where you are currently.
Yeah.
Maybe pick out a few things that you're really grateful for at this moment and just take a step back.
Yeah, and one thing I like to do is, when you first wake up in the morning and you're about to go to bed, try and just put the phone away for 5 to 15 minutes before each, or when you first wake up, and kind of just stay off of that kind of stuff, just to not start your day in that kind of mindset and to not end your day in that kind of mindset.
Yeah, I definitely noticed that my I feel like just like my emotions and like mental status is different when I have more time away from my phone and I'm not constantly like scrolling through looking at everything.
And that's not just comparing, and it's the news that you see on there and everything, the negativity on social media and what that brings is very impactful now. And you just do need time away from it some days.
Yeah.
And then just to kind of close this all out, we just wanted to talk about ways to deal with all types of societal pressures. So one thing we have here is just to create a pros and cons list, gather your thoughts, and figure out why you want certain things. When it comes down to decision making, if it's big decision, definitely I suggest do this where, what are the pros and what are the cons? Kind of like we were saying, we have this plan to get a house, but what are the pros of renting this house, and what is the pros of buying this house at this point in our moment in our life? Don't be a people pleaser. Although it may seem like the right thing to do on surface, it can actually make you very unhappy and dissatisfied.
Yeah, I think it can be like dangerous to be a people pleaser.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of the times it really like is taxing on yourself, and it takes away from what you truly feel like you should be doing or want to do just to make the others around you happy. And then when it comes down to it at the end of the day and you're like home, I feel like that you're like, oh, I didn't really do anything that was based off of like the decisions that I want to do. I just kind of did things because everyone around me seems like it's like what would make them happy and what they wanted to see me doing.
So another one here would just to be to make your own decisions. If your heart and mind are set on doing your thing, then do your thing. Don't be so stubborn that you completely disregard others' perspectives, but if you want it, trust yourself and go get it.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's definitely good to take in like the perspective from others. Like that can be very helpful. But if it's something, maybe like it's something that really comes back, you're constantly thinking about it, like it's really on your heart to do it, I think go ahead and do it.
Yeah, it's kind of like that saying, like when you want to get a tattoo or something, like save that image, put it away. If you look at it again in a week or two and you want it, do the same thing. If you see it in a month and you really want it, then do it. If you're seeing it 3-4 times and it's coming back in your mind, do your thing, and like I said, don't be negative to what other people say. Take that advice and, use it to make that pros and cons list. All these kind of go together and then make your decision there. But if it's something that your heart and mind really want you to do and it keeps coming up, then you should probably do it.
Yeah. And that's something, like we said, could totally go against like the norm of society currently, but it's what's best for you.
Right. Exactly. And then when you do that, the next one would just to be, don't be afraid of failure. We are all human and we all make mistakes, and that's huge. And I know, you've heard this probably your whole life, but it's so huge because I think even though we hear it our whole lives, we are still subject to being afraid of failure a lot.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like not everyone necessarily always talks about or shows their failures, which I think is why you can be a little bit more afraid of it. I feel like if maybe we like everyone talks about their failures a little bit more and like how that was a stepping stone for them, maybe it would kind of change that idea of failure, and it wouldn't be such a thing that people want to like avoid.
Yeah, and I think failure's painted in a negative light, but like this next one says, it's either a blessing or a lesson. So when you go to take these steps and you go to do your thing, it's either going to be a blessing or it's going to be a lesson. And decisions can lead to either blessings or lessons in life, regardless of if you fail or succeed in the choices that you make. And remember that if it leaves us with and just remember that it will leave us with memories, wisdom, and life lessons, regardless of if it's a blessing or a failure.
Yeah, I think failure is also kind of cool because in order to fail, it means you got out there and tried something, which is like, that's huge.
Something that you may not be comfortable with, you may not be familiar with. And even if you are, then that's that lesson portion. What did I do wrong? Well, maybe I should go back and create that pros and cons list, or maybe I should go back and, do this, then you learn how to accomplish that next time. And then it feels better because you got that life lesson, and then when something else comes up, you'll be like, oh, I shouldn't go that route.
Yeah And then I like if it's something you succeeded in, then it was a blessing.
Right. Exactly. Overcoming the pressures of society, the main thing is that with social media nowadays, we see everything, and we have to remember that that's just a snip pick of what people want us to see. And we can't, like we said, we need to kind of draw our guidelines, draw our own script, kind of stick with that script, whether you're single, whether you're in a relationship, whether you're married, and continue on that script until things go off the rail. And then you want to evaluate, create a pros and cons list, and restart that list and kind of get things re-rolling.
I agree. I like that.
Perfect. Well, that is all from us this week, and we would both just like to thank you so much for listening. And if you could, leave us a review on wherever you're listening by either just tapping on the stars or leaving a written review if you could. Also, make sure you follow us on Instagram and Twitter for weekly updates and questions that you may not see or hear on this podcast. Thank you all so much for listening, and we will talk to you next week.
Talk to you then.